So if you've been listening to this podcast at all, you might recall that I said that one of the most important cultural events in our era was when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock across the face. I was surfing Facebook a little bit, and as I was scrolling down, I happened to see just an absolutely wonderful meme. And the picture of it was Chuck Norris. And what it said was when Chuck Norris tells a joke about Will Smith's wife, Will Smith slaps himself. And I just had to share that with you all tonight. I think that was one of the funniest things I think I've come across since Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. And by the way, this is the Bill Sang Podcast. My name is Bill Sang. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I'm so excited to be able to get this out to you as a special Friday edition. And it's going to be a fairly random episode, to tell the truth. It's been a somewhat slow news week. There's been a lot of noteworthy stuff happening, don't get me wrong, but it's so messy in terms of all the white noise the media puts into all the stories that you can't really tell what's truly happening. What's going on with the Mar-a-Lago raid? What's going on with the January 6th committee? What's happening with anything really right now? And so I thought it might be kind of cool today just to have a little bit of fun. And I thought that was one of the most fun events that we've had happen in a long while, was when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars. And I'm not saying that it was good. I'm not saying it was bad. And ultimately, yes, I think it was bad because it set a horrible precedent. It says you can't tell jokes. I think that Chris Rock's joke was off color, to tell the truth. But on the same token, he's a comedian, and comedians should be able to have freedom of speech. And you kind of know with an edgy comedian like Chris Rock that things like that are going to happen. So to kind of kick off the rest of this episode, I want to, if you don't know me very well, I need to tell you that I wrestled for 13 years competitively. So I started when I was about 7, 8 years old. So when I was about in first grade, I believe, ballpark, I can't remember exactly how old I was, but I know I started in first grade for sure. And so wrestling had been a pretty big part of my life. So I've taken martial arts, I've taken combat sports very seriously. And for a while, it took me a while to get into MMA and all that. I haven't practiced MMA, but I love watching it from time to time for the sake that there is a grappling aspect to it, in which lots of times those who have wrestled have an automatic, not necessarily leg up, but they are automatically competitive in it because they know how to handle themselves on the mat. Well, there's two characters I want to talk about real fast that I think are given way too much credit when it comes to their knowledge of the martial arts, combat sports, or just generally speaking, just in being a tough guy. The first one is Bruce Lee. And I know that other people have talked about Bruce Lee before, but what I really can't stand about people backing up Bruce Lee's legend is, for instance, I was on YouTube the other day, and I happened to have a Bruce Lee clip inside of my feed. And what it said is, Bruce Lee beats up a whole clan of samurai masters. It was a movie. It didn't really happen, and the way that it happened was actually pretty ridiculous. Bruce Lee, super duper fast, incredible martial artist in terms of his speed, in terms of his coordination, and I'm not going to question his actual skill. But when you watch this clip of the movie, for half the time, people are just waving their arms around in the background before they confront him one-on-one. Could Bruce Lee have taken on a whole room of samurai masters and defeated them? The answer is no, he could not have done it. That's why they had to flail their arms around and act like they didn't know what to do while he was beating up their friends. And that's the typical nature of fighting more than one opponent, is that if you take on a whole bunch of people at the same time, you're just probably not going to win. With exceptions, I will say. What I do have to say about Bruce Lee, though, well, first, sort of, again, the mythos of Bruce Lee. Another thing that I remember coming across a while back was a supposed true life story of the time that Bruce Lee owned Jackie Chan. And I was like, wow, this has got to be interesting. So I went ahead, I clicked the link, and it told this story about how Jackie Chan was what do you call it? He was one of the people, an extra, and so to speak. He was one of the choreographed fighters inside of Bruce Lee. He's going to be one of the guys that gets hit by Bruce Lee in a fight. And apparently Bruce Lee, if I'm not mistaken, while they were filming, threw a punch that accidentally caught Jackie Chan in the face. And after everything was done being recorded, Bruce Lee apologized to Jackie Chan, and Jackie Chan was like, oh, cool, he kind of apologized. Is that a story of Bruce Lee owning Jackie Chan? And the answer is no. That was a story of Bruce Lee, once again, filming a movie and accidentally catching Jackie Chan with a fist in the face. Not a big deal. There's another one that came out not too long ago. It was a commercial of, and this is where it originated. It became a clip where Bruce Lee was playing ping pong with nunchucks. And it looks like an incredible clip, but when you do the research into it, it was actually a manufactured clip to make it look like Bruce Lee was playing ping pong with nunchucks. But it was actually recorded for a commercial, and it had no basis in reality that Bruce Lee had ever done anything like that. A lot of mythology behind Bruce Lee, and as far as I know, he only had one quote-unquote formal fight that he ever performed in his entire lifetime. And I say formal fight that he performed in his lifetime, and it's questionable as to what really happened, as it wasn't recorded. There was few eyewitnesses, and there was conflicting accounts about exactly what happened and who won, if the fight even concluded or began, for that matter. But what I do respect about Bruce Lee was when the Chinese government was telling Bruce Lee, do not show Americans martial arts. Do not show them how to do karate. Do not show them how to do kung fu. Bruce Lee said, forget about that. I'm going to do it. And he did it, which I thought was just one of the coolest things in the world, by the way. So do I have respect for Bruce Lee? I mean, the guy invented his own form of martial arts. Whether or not it's effective or popular or whatever, that's a whole different story. To be able to do that takes some skill and knowledge. And the fact that he actually defied the Chinese government back then in order to bring kung fu, karate, whatever it was, to America is pretty awesome on his part, and so he has definitely contributed to that culture in that sort of way. The other person, I have to balance this out, so I just picked on the Chinese with Bruce Lee a little bit. I have to point out another tough guy that we oftentimes try to make out to be larger than life, and indeed in many ways he was, is John Wayne. Love John Wayne in many respects, but again, I'm just trying to bring balance here. We talk about John Wayne as though he's some sort of great hero, but aside from making movies, what was it that he actually did? And he probably did some good things, by the way. I'm not taking away that maybe he gave to charity, maybe he did something. I don't know. But I haven't heard a whole lot about his personal achievements, endeavors. We make him out to be a cowboy, but he starred as a cowboy in movies, not, as far as I know, as a real-life cowboy. I don't believe that he was truly in law enforcement in any sort of way. So I'm just throwing that out there, and I'm not going to go any further with that because I didn't do a whole lot of research into John Wayne. But it's one of those things, you see how we kind of idolize people. We turn them into things they really were not. Now, on the other hand, a man who is worth every grain of salt that his reputation brought him is Chuck Norris himself, the one who I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, because Chuck Norris was a 40 bazillion time world martial arts champion. This guy was an animal, and he was good friends with Bruce Lee, actually. And despite the fact that they fought in movies, they never actually fought in real life. And to tell the truth, it's probably for the best, because Chuck Norris would have won, if I'm not mistaken. A bigger man, probably stronger, and he actually did fight competitively. And as a wrestler, let me tell you that makes a big difference. You can be flashy all you want when people know what you're going to do and you know what they're going to do. But when it comes to being on a mat and facing a person down and they are actively trying to do you harm, it totally changes the dynamic of a combat sport. So it's way different from, I don't want to say way different from sparring, but it's significantly different when there's a competitive aspect to it and there's skin in the game from both sides. I find this story to be fun. but you might disagree with me. We talked a little about Ron DeSantis and sending illegal immigrants, to Martha's Vineyard. The outcry from the left about how cruel that was. But Ron DeSantis, while he's under investigation, has revealed that he actually gave them maps of Martha's Vineyard and showed them where shelters were, where food was, where work was, and all these things. So they're actually fairly well prepared. But now they're sending the immigrants back. That Martha's Vineyard does not want the illegal immigrants, and so they're sending them away. What does that tell you about the message that these liberal Democrats are trying to get across by sending back the illegal immigrants that were sent to them by Ron DeSantis? Now, I don't believe that Ron DeSantis made any promises to them. The claim is that he did and that he lied to them, but DeSantis himself is saying that that's not true, but they did tell them how to get around Martha's Vineyard, more or less. I don't want to talk a whole lot about that right now. I think that situation it's not a mess. I mean, the illegal immigration situation is a mess. And really, the government needs to take control of it and start keeping people from illegally entering the United States of America. Is that going to happen? Not during this administration's reign. That's just reality. And so you might as well stop getting angry about it, because it's just going to waste your time. So do what you can. Vote. Try to share Jesus with these people as they cross the border, I suppose. Just do what you can to stay happy and to stay optimistic that things are going to turn out right there. The Queen of England, of course, passed away. Queen Elizabeth, the second, the third? I don't remember exactly. I'm an American, so I don't have to know these details exactly. A lot of people talking about the impact that she had culturally. She's been around quite a while, 94, 96, one of those numbers. She lived to be a ripe old age, essentially, and I say that in all due respect right there, that she had a tremendous impact on Great Britain and throughout the world as well. If I'm not mistaken, she grew up during World War II, and so you have this woman that appeared very quiet throughout her tenure as queen, but who achieved an awful lot. And I've done a little bit of reading, things that she did that were good and things that she did that were bad. What does it boil down to? If you were in a position of power like that she has, you can't help but the fact some of the things you're going to do are bad. I've even said about Ronald Reagan that some of the things that he did were not the greatest. The amnesty bill was a disaster, in my opinion. I don't know if he regretted it or not, but the amnesty bill was an absolute disaster with its results, and we can see today that it did no good to grant 3 million people amnesty, because illegal immigration is still running rampant, and it just needs to be brought to a stop. So one of the things this is really random, is the topic of homeschool. And I have to say, the more homeschool kids I've run across, the more and more impressed I am. I guess I can't give a whole lot of details, but homeschool numbers are up dramatically from what they were a number of years ago, and that was thanks to the COVID lockdowns, that finally parents got to see what teachers were trying to impart to their children, trying to teach their children, and it, in many respects, was shameful. There was a lot of teachers that were being honorable and doing their job and teaching the subject matter that they were entrusted with, but there are many teachers, way more than what people would have suspected, that were simply pushing far left talking points. Now you see how this only works one way, that you don't have conservative teachers trying to push their agendas, their political agendas upon children. You probably have that a little bit. You can't help but to share your biases with people. They come out one way or the other. But you don't have teachers trying to convert children into MAGA Republicans, for instance. And by the way, I don't even say that in a negative way. I would say that MAGA Republican, in many respects, might even be commendable. But you don't see that inside of classrooms. Instead, you have these terrible examples of teachers who are trying to convert their students to liberalism. In fact, I heard a story not too long ago about a liberal professor that, what was it they were trying to push? I think that it was like something to do with gender identity. And no, it had to do with oh man, they were talking about all sorts of weird stuff. I heard it on Louder with Crowder, and they were talking about the perspective that, the skewed perspective that we have on history. And of course, the case he was making is that we have a very racist perspective on American history and so forth. And this is the type of person that teaches your children. This person was teaching at a collegiate level, but nonetheless, it's the same type of person that is starting to get into just public schools K through 12. And the more and more this goes on, the more and more we're going to see this influx of radical leftist teachers trying to push these, I say far left, and by far left I mean socialistic, communistic ideas on their students that just have all these really perverted notions of human nature and reality, and confusing children to the point that they don't know whether they are a boy or a girl, whether they are attracted to guys or to girls. And it's very easy math to do. And what I like about the Bible is it paints it out very black and white, that God created them male and female. So that's my personal belief, and that is not confusing for anybody. I think they're mentally more healthy that way. But we're grateful that homeschooling is up. I am so grateful for the homeschoolers that I get to interact with. And like I said, I just get to interact with more and more. And man, I absolutely love them. I love public school kids too. I think they're wonderful. But I think that homeschool kids need a lot more credit than what they're getting, because it's incredible the things they're learning. And I think that it's kind of, they're going to be the ones to preserve our culture, to take us into a new golden age, so to speak, if we are to see another golden age, so to speak. So this one is another sort of serious topic that I think is very worth mentioning. You've heard the story of Kaylor Elsinger. Kaylor Elsinger. If you're unfamiliar, he was literally run over by a car by a man who simply ran him over and murdered him because Kaylor Elsinger considers himself a MAGA Republican. Now, Joe Biden, if you haven't forgotten yet, just made a speech that some are calling his red speech, that some people call his creepy speech. There's all sorts of names going on about it, and the sole purpose of it was to warn people about MAGA Republicans, scare people about MAGA Republicans and how dangerous they are and how violent they are. And having grown up listening to a lot of talk radio, the charge is always brought against talk radio hosts, and by the way, against Steven Crowder now even. He's kind of filled the void of Rush Limbaugh there, I think, in terms of taking upon the heat that Rush used to take. But now that Steven Crowder is probably the biggest conservative radio host, I don't know if radio podcast host, whatever, talk show host in the country right now. And he's starting to take that flack. He's starting to take the same heat that Rush had to take. And they take all this heat, saying they're inciting violence by simply calling out the left on ridiculous things that they're doing. And yet, this guy ran over a teenage boy, man, I don't know how old he was, simply because Kaylor Elsinger was a MAGA Republican. So our hearts go out to Kaylor Elsinger's family. Condolences to you. May God bless you, and may He comfort you as well, as this is just a very tragic event. And this is another thing I came across on social media, a side-by-side comparison, just very brief side-by-side comparison of George Floyd and Kaylor Elsinger. George Floyd, he was a criminal. He had committed violent acts of crime, and that he died essentially because he was resisting arrest. Now, I saw the video, and it's not like he was fighting anybody, but for a short while he was mildly resisting arrest. And he was not killed by Derek Chauvin, the officer, by the way. And I wish people would talk about this. Derek Chauvin was not at fault. He did everything that he was supposed to do. They even listened to George Floyd when George Floyd said to put him on the ground. George Floyd said to put him on the ground. And so they did, and Chauvin made the mistake of putting his knee on the back of Floyd's neck because he didn't want him running off. Now, when I saw the videos, I immediately thought, he's not putting any pressure on his neck. He's not like putting his weight on his neck. And the whole time George Floyd is saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. You're going to kill me. But the thing is, if you see the whole video, he was saying that before he even got out of the car, before he was put on the ground. What killed George Floyd? It's not simply because he was resisting arrest. It's because he had a very high level of fentanyl in his system, and the added stress of being confronted by the police was just too much on him, too much on his heart, and he was going to die if he remained in that situation. And that's sadly what happened. I'm not saying he deserved to die. I'm saying that's what happened. On the other hand, there was an uproar. My goodness, the destruction that was done on behalf of George Floyd was way beyond what was called for. And it was very hard for people to stand up and say, this is not right, because it was turned into a racial issue and it had nothing to do with race. In fact, the officers went above and beyond the call of duty in order not to harm him. Kaylor Elsinger, on the other hand, Kaylor Elsinger was ran over because he was a MAGA Republican, because he supported Donald Trump. That was his only crime. Was that a crime? Well, of course it wasn't a crime. And yet this man ran him over and showed no remorse whatsoever. He complained, from what I heard, that he was going to be sent to prison and be away from his family and have to pay bail and all these things. In fact, I think they did pay bail even. So I don't think that he's even in prison right now. I think he's been let free. And here we are, a family is without their son, and this man gets to go free. And there's no murals, there's no parades, there's no riots, there's hardly even an accusation that the left has gone too far. And I'm talking about with conservatives here, that we are not saying the left has gone too far. Let me say it, the left has gone too far. They're now inciting violence and people are getting hurt. So thus far, I've kind of departed from the fun feel of this Friday podcast, but I felt like those are some things that need to be said. Like I said, lots of random topics in here. I'll finish off with something that's a little bit more fun, a little bit up my aisle here in terms of this. But I want to point out one more thing that's kind of serious. I was just on ICR.org, and they were releasing an article about belief of God inside this country. And good news is 81% of the country still believes in God. That's significantly down, especially if you go back to the 1940s when 98% believed in God. But still 81% of people still believe in God, and that's good, even though it's on a drastic decline. Within Christians, in respect to the Bible, rather. In respect to the Bible, 20% of people say they believe that the Bible is true and that it is literal. 29% believe that it is full of fables and myths, while 50% believe it's true but not literal. And my freshman year of college, I have a brief story about, because I used to not be certain as to whether the Bible was literal or not. And let me share with you before I believed the Bible was absolutely literal, my freshman year of college, I remember I was taking a class. I'm not going to share with you what exactly that class's name was. But inside the class, we talked about all sorts of social issues. And one of them we were talking about was homosexuality at the time. And the professor, having heard that Christians believe that homosexuality is a sin, he then threw it out there. Hey, for those of you that are Christians, does the Bible actually say that it's a sin, or is it interpreted that it's a sin? And forgive me, I was foolish. I said, well, I think that it's interpreted to be a sin inside of the Bible. I was wrong. And why was I wrong? I was wrong because, get this, I hadn't read the entire Bible. And I wasn't actively reading the Bible. And yet, because I felt like I was enlightened, I was in college after all. I was, in many respects, I wasn't a straight A student all through high school, but throughout many grading periods, I was a straight A student inside of high school. So I was a really good student. So, well, surely if I got A's in high school and I was doing good in my freshman year of college, of course I know what the Bible has to say about homosexuality. No, I don't need to read it. I just know. And I was wrong. And then I started reading the Bible and I saw what it had to say. And I was like, ooh, I wish I could go back and take that back and say that, no, it's actually in the Bible that it indeed is a sin. Why do I mention that? Because 50% of evangelicals, or of Christians rather, say that the Bible is, well, 50% of Americans, I guess, say the Bible is true, but not literal. So why do they say that? Because they hear it's not literal and they simply believe it, and they spout the same sort of nonsense that I spewed out without even knowing what the Bible had to say. So stay tuned. Before long, I'm going to have, I did my Proof for God video. Look for that, listen to that, share that. But I'm also going to do a Proof for Jesus video before too long, and I want you to stay tuned for that. I don't mean I'm doing that right now. I mean in the future I'm going to be doing a Proof for Jesus video. And there's a reason why I did the Proof for God video first. So I want you to hang tight for that, for a future episode. But I want to close out with, we Americans don't give ourselves enough credit for America's greatness and the attitude it instills in us. I remember a while back, going back to sports, going back to wrestling and combat sports, I remember that Dan Gable, if you don't know who Dan Gable was, he went undefeated in the Olympics as a wrestler, and he didn't have a single point scored on him. And the most impressive feat was the fact that he had the respect of the Russian wrestling team. And if you don't know about the Russians are renowned for their wrestling program. I mean, these guys are animals. They're bears when it comes to wrestling. And so to earn their respect for Dan Gable is an incredible feat. And but what he said about international competition, the trick is, he said, as soon as you get the lead, they quit. They give up. They do not come back. Where Americans, on the other hand, might fight harder to come back if they lose the lead. So his goal was to get ahead as fast as he could, and he didn't have a single point scored on him in the Olympics. That's unheard of. It's still unheard of today to be unscored on in the Olympics in the sport of wrestling, especially for an American. So I bring this up because I'm talking MMA right now. So it's been a little while. I can't remember what year it was, but heavyweight UFC champion of the world currently is Francis Ngannou. I don't know how to pronounce that exactly, but Francis Ngannou. And he has not had a title defense yet. And now they're saying he might have a title defense in 2023. Wow. How long do you have to wait to have a title? I remember when Brock Lesnar was a former UFC champion. Of course, you know who Brock Lesnar was. That he was in the ring as much as he could be before and after he didn't have a whole lots of fights before he won the championship, but after that he was actively defending his championship until he finally came down with this disease that was just detrimental to his career, and he had to forfeit the belt temporarily while he took care of this health issue. And as soon as he resolved, for the most part, this health issue, he came back and he fought Shane Carwin to win the championship back. So he was stripped of his championship, and then he was thrown back into the ring. Not thrown, but he went back into the ring as soon as he was ready and fought again. Same thing with Stipe Miocic. Stipe Miocic, after winning the belt, I think he's had 3 or 4, maybe 5. I'm not sure exactly how many He's had at least 3 successful title defenses, lost the title, won it back, and I think he maybe had 1 or 2 title defenses before he fought Francis Ngannou. I could be wrong about that, but Francis Ngannou has just been sitting on the belt. It's been well over a year now, maybe 2 years. And he's dreaming about fighting Tyson Fury inside of a boxing ring. So he wants to have a boxing match with Tyson Fury, and it's not even being talked about who his next UFC fight is going to be against. And I understand he's had some surgeries. I get that. But why is he not being stripped of his championship? I do not get that. And again, this is the whole thing about foreigners in relation to competing with Americans in international sports. And that's not to say in every instance, but it just seems that as much as we like to tout them as being authentic, being about the sport and all that, I think that Francis Ngannou just simply likes the PR. He simply likes the press. He simply likes the marketing. He simply likes just being able to sit there and being able to soak up all this cash while he really isn't doing anything. I know that Dana White, the owner of UFC, is not too happy about all this. But I really don't understand why it is that Francis Ngannou can go all this time and not be stripped of his belt when Brock Lesnar was stripped very, very quickly. Relatively quickly, I should say. Maybe not very, very quickly, but relatively quickly of his title when it was known that he had to resolve certain health issues. So that's pretty much it for this podcast today. Weigh in with your thoughts. Comment below. Let me know what your thoughts are on all these issues. If you agree, disagree. Again, lots of these topics I went over were just for fun, not very serious. I did bring some serious stuff up as well, just because I think that it's important to stay informed. And there were some significant things that happened this week and previous weeks that I think needed to be addressed. So again, my name is Bill Sang. I want to get 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, 1,000 subscribers on Rumble. Also, make sure you're listening to Buzzsprout and iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, all those different platforms through which you can get podcasts on. Visit WilliamHSang.com. Check out our store. We do have some merchandise out there if you want to check that out and support the show. Like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell. Do what you got to do. Make this program known. Please share it with your friends if you enjoyed it, or if you just agreed with the opinions, or if you just like other people having to look at my ugly face. So once again, Bill Sang Podcast. I am Bill Sang. Thank you for joining us today.